Step 4 of 12 of the steps pioneered by Alcoholics Anonymous way back when and adopted by many other 12 step groups since. Step 4 says that we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, which is a real twist and turn for some of us because I know I myself was great at taking the inventory of other people and deciding what was wrong with you and what you were doing incorrectly and how I could improve your life, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is, of course, a hallmark of codependency, being other focused. So taking an inventory of my own self, pretty radical. The principle that I'm honing in on is responsibility. And the question about this step is, who am I? First I'll dissect some of the language, the old language of the step of searching and fearless moral inventory, and of course noting that we made, as with all the steps, it's a we process, and especially when you get to step 4, it's important to have a guide at this point, someone that can help you through this process, because it can be very deep and challenging and triggering, and you're digging into the entirety of yourself, your whole exhausted list of the things you've done, the things you are and aren't, the good and the bad and the in between. So like really having a mentor at this point is really strongly suggested and advised, whoever that may be. The ideal is someone that's been through this process before, so they know what it's about and they have experience with it. So that said, the moral part is often the part that people can get hung up on with this step, I find. There's a lot of moralizing that goes on in the world in general, but can in relation to 12-step recovery. You must this, you must believe in the Sky Daddy, whatever, But you mustn't. That's not required. But what is in the step is taking a look at oneself, and whether you like the word moral or you just want to say if you're searching in fearless and thorough, those are the key markers. The moral part I think relates just to like the actions we've taken. Really you could just say it's like a behavioral inventory. That would be, I think, a little easier to reconcile, right? Because it takes away from some of that like kind of like sort of like wrathful, brimstony kind of feeling and language, yes. And because this isn't about judgment. This isn't about judgment, and like it's ironic because a lot of people think that it is, and there's a lot of people that are uninitiated and not understanding what this step is about, that don't stop to take inventory of the good that they've done and the positive things about themselves. They just use it as an exercise of self-abuse, and it's not what it's intended for. So as I said, the searching and fearless part, that's the critical part. And it's really, like I've said in the previous talks, but this step is really important to not look past and not plan beyond. Like if you can get yourself in the headspace of tricking yourself into just forgetting that there's anything that comes next, that can be beneficial. Because if you start writing in mind that something needs to happen afterwards, you might sell yourself short. Just like you might sell yourself short with the level of honesty you can reach. And I found myself, it's really important to rely on a higher power of my understanding to get myself, like to motivate myself to be fully self-disclosing, fully honest with myself, really take a look at the whole picture, not leave anything out, that's inconvenient, or perhaps you're working on like a really potent addiction, but you just like really don't want to consider certain areas, like maybe you have some secondary addictions going on and you're just like really not wanting to look at that stuff right now. I'm not your dad, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to suggest that the more fearless and thorough that you are in this inventory, the more benefit you'll gain from it. if you leave stones uncovered, it might they might fester. You know, it's like the saying of like secrets grow in the dark. You know, like if you shine a light on things, then the monsters just disappear because they were never there. So there's some the different organizations have different formats and structures to this step. But and they're all very valuable and useful. And like some of the key stuff has been like inventory of fears, sexual conduct, resentments, things like this. Like all the harms we've caused to people. Perhaps we've stolen, lied, cheated, all the things that we've done that could have caused harm. And the idea, and a skillful guide will be able to help you with this, because one might ask, like, what is the point of this self-abusive exercise? Like, why would I want to do this to myself? It's going to be so painful. And yeah, it is going to be difficult. This isn't easy stuff. But the idea behind this is that, like, when going through all these behaviors and patterns and things of the past, patterns start to emerge. Patterns start to emerge of the underlying habits, our underlying personality quirks and traits and habits and tendencies and dispositions. These things start to emerge and become clear, and it's that clarity and that insight and understanding that will be used later to help us get even more freedom. So I can tell you when I first did my first rough fourth step that I actually shared with someone. I was in treatment, and basically, like, I didn't really do it the like the quote unquote right way. I just did I just listed all the things that I had done that I thought were like too horrible for myself to ever be accepted into humanity again. Just the things that I thought like I couldn't be forgiven for, and that made me a monster. I basically wrote out all that stuff, and then I shared it with a counselor at the treatment center I was in. And when I did share it with him, him being a person in recovery himself, he didn't bat an eyelash. I mean, like, I don't want to say he was like bored listening to it, because he was engaged and he cared about me and stuff. But like, he certainly wasn't shocked or appalled by anything I told him. It was all just like, oh yeah, like, yeah, I've got some stuff like that. And the power of that experience alone, and this is again, like, I didn't even really do a full full thing. I just kind of did like the quick pain version, right? But the experience was so profoundly connecting. Like, it was then when I really thought, like, it started to believe again, like, oh, I could be part of this society, this culture, this humanity. There's just such a relief that came with it. Just such a relief that came with it. There's like a real clear point of like before and after. Like there's a real divide in life for me. And there's been others since, but that was a real major one. And I followed it up by doing a more thorough one. Like after that was, because that was all the stuff that, like, those were all the things that I thought, all the things that I would have wanted to hide. Like that was all like the real core stuff that I wanted to hide. I finished and did the rest of the stuff. But after that, like the rest of it was pretty easy, because I thought those were the things that would get me rejected from humanity. But and some of these patterns started to emerge. Like I really started to see that in that version of my step 4, so much of my suffering and so much of my resentment came from not using my voice. I accepted poor treatment from people, and I didn't speak up and tell them I didn't want to be treated that way. I hung around with people that were unkind to me and abusive to me, and played mind games with me. I kept going back to the same woman that, and believe me, I had a part in this relationship dysfunction. But this woman that, was like cheating on me and sleeping with my friends and playing all kinds of mind games. I just like subjected myself to all sorts of abuse, and I just didn't speak up. I didn't speak up for myself, and that was like a huge pattern that emerged for me, all through my first 4th step. And that was a powerful insight. It was a powerful insight into starting to see, like, oh, bro, like, my self-esteem is like really weak. Like I don't believe in myself. Like it really just highlighted some of these things. And I was able to start sitting with them and doing a little bit of grieving and like honoring of, like letting go, which is a long process in itself. It's not just, I won't sit here and tell you that I did this step and then like everything was completely different after that. Like, no, everything was different, but like there was still a lot of challenge and a lot of, work to be done. So as I said at the beginning, the question of who am I and the principle of responsibility are probably seeming pretty evident at this point. But that's the basis of this step, is taking responsibility for who and what I am. And not only taking responsibility for it, but as I've kind of mentioned, it's the who I am part is like, this is like a really big process of self-discovery. Like I've heard it said that a step forward is the most loving and generous thing you can do for yourself. And of course, at this point, I believe that, like I believe, I believe the idea, right? Like, I don't know if it's the most generous thing you could ever do for yourself. I mean, like, I think buying myself a yacht would be pretty darn generous, but it's neither here nor there. But it is an incredibly generous act for myself, to do this step and all the subsequent ones I've done since, they've been profound and healing as well, and I've gotten to see like who I am, and it's it's actually okay, like I really understand now through like a lot of process and recovery that like everyone has stuff that they wouldn't want to tell anyone. Like we've all got things we're guilty about. We've hurt other people, acted in ways we're not proud of, and we've all got things that we are really proud of, and we are really great in certain ways, and we have really potent attributes and virtues. And the interesting thing is like for people, especially people that have had like like a lot of addiction stuff, is that like sometimes looking at the positive attributes can be a lot harder. It can be a lot harder to see the things that are great about ourselves. But man, it's a gift, And in this culture, I think there's a lot of, false humility kind of thing. It's like, oh, look, we can't talk about, and like as soon as you say that you're good at something, it's like, oh, this person's a braggart. This is an arrogant person. It's like, no, that's not the case. It's all about how you do it. Like if you're up there on a stage saying, I am the best in things and I am the greatest, like with this attitude of pompousness, well, that's pretty a clear indicator. But to just say, like, for myself, like I was a martial artist for some time and I was good at it. I was a good kickboxer. I can own my attribute of generosity. That's actually one of my strongest virtues. Is I'm a generous person. I have a generous nature. And like the way I use this, or rather, don't use these things. I don't use them in a way that's to like aggrandize myself or pump my own tires. It's just like I can talk about it if it's relevant. So I'm not out there telling everyone about how generous I am. But if if there's a situation that calls for it, I can talk about it. And that's my understanding of real humility. Being able to, see the good and the bad about oneself and just own it, just to know it. And I've already said about how challenging this process can be and how difficult it can be, but I'll reiterate it that I hope if you are engaging in this, you have a guide or at least a support network that you can lean on, because there's those of us there's so much trauma in the world and in our bodies and in our minds, and this process can dig them up. There's actually people that really think that doing inventories like this can be really harmful, and I can't say that I can't confidently say that that's totally false. Like I think it could be. I think it could be. I think that is possible. Like that said, I really believe in this process and the healing power of it. But it's just so important to be supported through it. Because all kinds of wild stuff can come up, all kinds of wild feelings that you might have not felt. If you start digging around in your childhood, stuff's going to come up very possibly. But what you'll be left with is a whole bunch of room for new stuff, room for new ideas, new things to look at in yourself, in the world, new perspectives. So I think I've sold the step well enough at this point. If you're going to do it, there's many step working guides out there from different recovery fellowships. There's no shortage of guides. And there's also just like, before there was any of those things, people were just doing it out of their mind. They were just like, hey, we'll like write down everything. So if you're going to do it that way, yeah, just start to consider things like I said, resentments, things you're afraid of, your sexual conduct, the things, the ways you've hurt people, ways you've taken advantage, ways you've slacked off. Consider different areas of your life, consider all areas of your life. You can parse it up into sections like early childhood, adolescence, teenage, etc. You can parse it up into sections of your life, family, friends, work, finances, romantic relationships. What's your relationship with the government like? Do you have resentment there? Like thinking about institutions, how do you feel towards the schools you went to? Really dig into all areas. That's the thing. And because nothing isn't unimportant, you'd be really surprised how, just thinking about like your university and some stuff that just seemed really innocuous, but can be actually like a really strong indicator of some underlying, fears or biases. And of course, seeing as it's a addictions recovery program at heart, that's the key to hone in on, is to, like when I was using this, how did I cause, what effects did it cause, I tend now to go from that really like sweeping broad lens. But, if this is your first go around, it's really important to really root that stuff out, especially if you're really trying to get free of an addiction. To really look at all the consequences of that behavior. Like for me, when I was using meth, I was assaulting people, I was going to jail, I was stealing more than I can even explain. I was treating myself like I was just neglecting myself and others, people that cared about me. I was just so unreliable. So these things are important to look at, but not exclusively. Not exclusively. So Stephen Covey separates the word responsibility into response ability. And this process of investigation and awareness is like the foundation for being able to make responsible choices rather than just acting from our old default modes of being. And as always, don't take my word for this. See for yourself. Check it out. Try it. See if it works for you. All right. May it be well.